Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab for today's workshop.
And welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. We're really happy that you could join us today. And we're really excited to be talking to you about how you can vet an IT support provider. That's something that a lot of nonprofit organizations have to do at some point, sooner or later in their experience. And so we've learned a lot as an IT support provider about what to look for and what to look out for when you are selecting an IT support provider. So we're excited to be here and share what we've learned with you today. I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO at Community IT, and I am in my 22nd year at CIT. I started off as a technician back in the dial-up days and proceeded to keep my technical skills fresh for a little while, and then moved over onto the management side and became the CEO 7 years ago when our founder, David Deal, sold the company to the employees. I'd like to welcome my co-presenter, Steve Longenecker.
Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Longenecker. I'm the Director of IT Consulting at Community IT. I've been at Community IT for 17 years. That seems like a long time. I keep trying to catch up to Johan, and I never do. I was a refugee from a classroom teaching job that I had, a career that I had before I came to Community IT, but it's been a nice long spell. And as Director of IT Consulting, I also see a lot of what our clients and what other clients need when they're looking for a managed service provider.
So before we begin, I want to tell you a little bit more about our company. Community IT is, as I mentioned before, a 100% employee-owned company, and we exist to help nonprofits use technology effectively. Our goal is to advance the missions of our customers through the effective use of technology. We have about 40 staff. We're based in Washington, D.C. We serve nonprofits throughout the country, and we're consistently named a top 501 managed services provider by Channel Futures, and that's an honor that we received again in 2021. You may be asking, what is a managed services provider? What is an MSP? You came to the right place, because that is the very first learning objective for today's webinar. So Steve and I are going to turn our cameras off here to conserve bandwidth and help everybody focus on the slides and talk about what we're going to focus on today. So today we are going to look at what an MSP, managed service provider, is, talk about why you might need an MSP as a nonprofit organization, and then talk about different ways you can go about finding and selecting a good MSP to help you with IT support. Before we do that, though, we've got a couple polls for you today, and I'd like to launch the first one right now. We're just curious, how large is your organization? We've got a couple different breakdowns of size here, and MSPs actually, there are MSPs that work with enterprises. So there's IT support providers that provide support to organizations that have thousands of staff. We work in what's known as the SMB or mid-market space, and that's typically organizations between 10 and 100 staff or over 100. But we're just curious what today's audience has.
Johan, are you able to see these results?
I am, excuse me, I am not seeing the results. Do you see them, Steve?
I see them. Yeah, it looks like over half, but just over half are between 10 and 50. Sort of the biggest group is 10 to 25 with 35%. A quarter are less than 10. That's a significant number of people. So we should definitely talk about how very small organizations benefit from an MSP. And then there's a small number that are 50 to 100, 15%, and then 5% that are over 100.
Great. Well, yeah, we'll definitely be sure to address the needs of all of those different size categories in our presentation today. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about what a managed services provider is. At the most basic level, a managed services provider, or an MSP as we like to refer to ourselves in the industry, is someone who's providing outsourced IT support. So a managed services provider is helping organizations use their technology, hopefully use their technology effectively. And that leads to our second poll question. We've got a couple quick poll questions here before we get into the main content. We're just curious, how does your organization currently support IT? Is it an in-house? Do you have IT support in-house? Are you outsourcing it already? Are you using some combination?
I'm going to predict almost everybody's a combination. No, not that much. So right now I'm seeing 20% in-house, 20% outsourced, and 60% combination, Johan.
Right, great. We still got a mix. Combination works well, and in fact, I would say that's how we often prefer to work, where there's some level of IT ownership that's maintained inside the organization. So let's talk a little bit about a managed services provider. Typically, managed services providers are providing infrastructure support. So they're supporting the IT infrastructure. And that oftentimes mean what we call endpoints, like laptops. Sometimes it'll be mobile devices. They may be supporting the basic productivity tools that an organization is using, like Office 365 or Google Workspace, the email platform that the organization depends on, the video conferencing platform that the organization uses to communicate both internally and with external stakeholders. It can also mean for organizations that have offices, the networking infrastructure in the office, the wireless network, the connectivity to the internet, and then also any servers that the organization might have and applications that are installed on those servers. So managed services providers are focused on the infrastructure, sort of the basic foundation that the rest of IT might be built on. So they're typically not providing support for using databases. So they're not helping organizations running reports in databases or keeping their data clean. They're not necessarily helping organizations with maintaining their website or updating it to keep up with the marketing strategy. MSPs are mostly focused on infrastructure support, and oftentimes those other IT needs are either met in-house or they're provided by a different kind of provider, like a web designer or a data management consultant. What distinguishes managed services providers from other types of infrastructure support is that it's comprehensive and that it's a holistic service. So managed services providers are basically supporting all of the infrastructure, and they're doing it in a comprehensive and holistic way. So it's not piecemeal, and it's not what we call break fix, where a break fix provider is someone that you don't see very often. When something breaks, you might call them, they'll come in and fix it. You don't see them again until it breaks again. Whereas a managed services provider typically has what are known as management agents or software on the computers. They're monitoring the services, and they're taking a proactive approach to making sure that the IT is available. So instead of fixing it when it breaks, they're making sure that it doesn't break and that it's meeting the overall needs of the organization. Would you add anything to that, Steve?
It's worth saying that there was an evolution in the industry and the space towards this current sort of approach to IT. Break fix was just how everything was done probably at one time when you talked about outsourced IT. It's also worth talking about or mentioning the fact that I'm sure it'll come up later in the presentation, but that generally for managed service providers, the contracts are structured in such a way that it incentivizes a proactive approach and sort of preventing problems before they happen rather than solving problems after they happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. Managed services providers will often bill on a fixed fee basis. So they'll use some measure like the number of staff, number of users, number of computers that are being supported, and then they'll have an option to charge you on a fixed fee basis for supporting every infrastructure IT need that comes up, as opposed to billing strictly on an hourly rate basis.
It's also worth just talking about the fact that, or I mean, again, I'm maybe stepping on future slides, but that the way this has evolved is there's a lot of historical pieces to this, and so for why does an MSP, a traditional MSP like Community IT, support the email platform, but not necessarily support the website as much? And it just has to do with the fact, I believe this is true, with the fact that when I started at Community IT, and certainly when Johan started at Community IT, email was often running on a server in someone's office. The fact that it's now, for the most part, software as a service provided by a big service company, like whether it's Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 or something else, it's not that different from a website in some ways. But email used to be part of IT infrastructure, and so the MSP still supports it like it's part of IT infrastructure. It's getting very the definitions are kind of mushy. Similarly, today, a lot of security stuff is falling under the MSP's purview, although not every part of security. Sometimes you talk about managed security providers or service providers as a add-on service, but some MSPs, Community IT is one of them, certainly hopes to be able to provide its clients with the security, IT-related security support that they need.
Yeah, and we will talk about security at some length later in the presentation. But I think you're right, and I think another factor in managed services is that it tends to be technology that's somewhat generic in that it's used by lots of different types of organizations.
Right.
Whereas typically, like specific databases tend to be more focused on a specific business activity, like a fundraising database or an association management system. And so we support email because it's something that every nonprofit needs and uses. And so it's kind of a generic service. And typically most managed services providers are supporting those generic services. It's important to note, though, that there are managed service providers that specialize in certain types of businesses, and they might manage specialized services. So, for example, there are MSPs that focus on dentists' office, and so they'll provide and support the computers, but then maybe they'll also specialize in one particular type of electronic medical record system used by dentists, and then they just provide that service to dentists. So you probably don't want to work with that MSP if you're a small nonprofit organization, but there can be that level of specialization. But in general, most MSPs tend to be a little bit more generalist.
I'm amazed at the IT I meet in my dentist office these days. It's crazy. I'm serious.
No, it's a lot. It's
crazy visuals of my teeth. It's a little scary. Anyway, but yes, we're often a bunch of very good generalists for the most part, right? I think that's generally fair to say.
Yeah, and that sort of leads into the next slide. And this is really what we're going to talk about for the remainder of the presentation today, is how can you go about identifying and selecting a good MSP for your organization. And there's really, we actually have 12 questions that you can ask as you're vetting MSPs. And we're going to go through each one of those questions sort of explain why they're important to ask, and how you can use that question to evaluate a potential MSP. But basically, all of these questions are doing two things. One, they're helping you to evaluate the quality and capacity of the MSP. So you want to understand, what's the quality of service that they're going to be providing? How good are they at managing IT? And what's their capacity? And I think capacity it partly means, are they able to take you on as a client? Are they able to add more customers to the number of customers that they're already supporting without being stretched? But also, are they able to work with your type of organization? So, if you're a 10-person organization and you find an MSP that most of their clients are in the 100-person range, are they really going to have the capacity to provide you with the service that you need, or are you just going to be too small for them to really pay much attention to? Or conversely, if you're a 100-person organization and you're talking to an MSP that typically only works with 10, 15 person organizations, are they going to understand the complexity and the sophistication of a larger organization, both on a day-to-day basis as well as with regards to long-term planning? So evaluating quality and capacity is very important. And then also finding the best fit. And we're big proponents of finding the right fit. We believe that we're a great MSP. We're a great fit for a lot of organizations, especially nonprofits. But we may not be the best fit for everybody. And one of the things that we really try to do in the sales process is help our potential future customer help them understand whether or not we're a great fit for them. Are we a good fit for their culture? Are we a good fit for how they work? Are we a good fit for what they need? So finding the right fit, there's so many MSPs out there. Finding the one that's the right fit for your organization is really important. So we're going to pause here for another poll question, and just kind of curious, what type of IT support do you currently have? Do you have a managed services provider that you're working with? Are you working with a break-fix IT support provider? Are you working with some other kind of IT support provider?
For people who are in-house, would they be checking off other, do you think?
Yeah,
or would they?
If you're in-house, you can check other.
Well, other is a big winner, but that's partly, of course, because we picked up all the in-house votes. And then MSP is 33%.
Oh, great.
And break fix is a very small number, 5%.
Okay, great. Well, those of you who are still on break fix, it's not that break fix is a bad fit, and especially for really small organizations, if you have less than 5 staff, break fix can be a great approach. It delivers a lot of value to those size organizations. But if you are break fix and you're feeling some of the pain of that, if it's not a great fit for you, then hopefully these questions will be helpful. And for those of you who have an MSP already, it never hurts to apply these questions in this evaluation to your current provider. So let's go through the list. These are basically the questions that you should be asking: getting references, asking the MSP who's going to answer the phone, who visits my location, staff tenure, how does pricing work, how is onboarding handled, how will you work with us, how will you report on your work, what vendors and technologies are supported, how is cybersecurity implemented, your capacity for strategic planning, and how is value delivered. And all of these questions are in the slides, which is a handout in the GoToWebinar window. You can download the slides there and have direct access to these questions. So the first one is references. It's really important to ask for references from your any potential MSPs that you're evaluating, and ideally you would have references that are similar to your organization. So similar in size, similar in the work that they do. If you are now a completely remote 100% dispersed workforce, you would ask for a reference of a similar type of organization. If you still have significant on-site presence, if your staff are going to an office now every day, you'd want a reference of a similar type organization. And also organizations that are at a similar IT maturity level. Do you have a lot of in-house server infrastructure with old software that you need to migrate away from? Ask for references of a similar organization that maybe the MSP helped migrate out of an on-premise infrastructure and into the cloud, if that's something that you're thinking about doing. And so ideally, when you ask for references from the MSP that you're evaluating, they have a number of references to choose from. They don't have just 3 references for everybody, but they're maintaining sort of a large list of references. We probably maintain a list of 25 to 30% of all of our clients at any given time are willing to act as references, and those cover a wide range of scenarios in terms of sizes, IT operational maturity, and ways in which they work. So references are really important. When you talk to the reference, when you call them up, you want to ask them how their experience working with the IT support provider is. You can ask them some of the questions that we're gonna cover in the next few slides to make sure that their experience matches up with what you're hearing from the MSP in the sales process. So you want to use the references as an opportunity to kind of vet what you're hearing. So references are really important, and I'd always ask for at least 3 or 4 references, and hear from them directly what their experience has been.
If I would add that when you're evaluating the references, you would assume that any reference given to you by an MSP that's trying to get you to join them and to take them on will have positive things to say, one would hope. But one thing to evaluate is in fact how close these references are to your journey. Now that's not always a perfect point of view. If you're working with an MSP that's relatively new, they may not have a large client base to choose references from, but that in itself is perhaps something that you will learn from doing the references. But if you want references and you're like, yeah, I'd like to talk to some other 100 people organizations, because I'm a 100-person plus organization, and I'd like to talk to people that are using Google. I'd like you to give me reference for people who are using Google Workspace, because we're having a lot of pain points with Google Workspace, and we need an MSP that has experience with Google Workspace and can help us with those pain points. And you get some glowing recommendations from 50-person organizations that are in Microsoft 365. Those are glowing recommendations, and they might say lots of nice things about the MSP, but you now know that they don't probably work with a lot of 100-person organizations in Google Workspace, and that may mean that they're not going to be have as much experience to draw on in helping you with your particular requirements.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's a lot of ways that you can get more specific information about who you're evaluating and how good a fit they are for your specific needs through references. The next question to ask is, who answers the phone? So this is kind of a defining feature of most MSPs. They typically have a help desk, and that's kind of the standard way that your staff will receive support from an MSP. There are MSPs that provide what's known in the industry as desk side support. So they have someone on site who goes to someone's desk. But in general, staff in your organization will be calling a help desk. This obviously has become even more prevalent in the COVID era, with people working remotely and working from home. So ask them who answers the phone, and it's not just. There's a couple of different things that you want to check for when you ask them that question. One is whether or not they provide their own help desk in-house, or do they outsource their help desk to a third party. And there are a number of companies that provide outsourced help desk services, or white label, as they call them, help desk services to MSPs. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes they can be really good. But it's just good to know, like, am I going to be talking with your MSP, or am I talking with, a third party contractor that you're working with? And if so, like, what level of control do you have, over the quality of their technical staff, over the customer service that they're going to be providing? So it's good to ask and find out, whether this is something that the MSP staffs in-house, or whether it's something that they outsource. At Community IT, we staff it in-house, and we've done that very intentionally and very deliberately, because a big part of the experience of working with us is working with people who want to support nonprofit organizations, who sort of understand and connect with the mission and the mission fit and that culture of mission at nonprofit organizations. So it's really important to us that our help desk staff identify with that culture. We find that it provides for a better overall experience for our customers. But that's, there are other organizations, maybe that, not to pick on the dentist MSP, but, maybe in that situation, it doesn't matter as much. Who's to say? But there can be different reasons. The other thing you want to find out is what's the technical level of the person answering the phone. Is it a non-technical person who's basically sort of doing air traffic control? Is it someone who's just triaging, and they're going to, create a ticket for you so that the technical person can call you back? Or are you actually able to get a hold of a technical person when you call? And if so, what level? And one way of finding out the answer to that question is to ask, what's your first call resolution? So that means how many tickets or technical issues are resolved by the first person who answers the phone. So first call resolution can be a good question to ask as well. Typically, you want to look for an MSP where they have a set of technical staff who are answering the phone and solving the problem right away, rather than a triage process, which, in our view, adds sort of an unnecessary step to the delivery of technical services.
And how quickly you get to that technical person.
That's right.
When you call, how long it takes. How are you fighting your way through a menu that's doing its own automated triage? That can be a frustrating experience for your staff if that's the case. They should have. Hopefully, the people you're finding this out about have those metrics, because that's also a sign of an MSP's maturity, is that they attend to these things and measure them. I think you can also ask, how big the help desk is. I think if it's if in terms of how many staff people are sort of on the help desk team, not necessarily a problem for it to be very large or very small, but you can see how with very, very, very large, you're never getting the same person twice. There's sort of the institutional knowledge is in any one person's head is pretty minimal, so they have to really have a quality documentation on your systems, or your systems have to be very, very much standardized for the person to be able to help quickly. But so smaller sounds better, because then you're sort of often getting the same people, and if they're good people, you get to know them, and it's great. Although too small, and then someone gets sick, and all of a sudden phones aren't being answered as quickly. Probably there's at least more than one person on the help desk, but those are other things that you can ask about this part of the puzzle.
Yep. Yeah, so you definitely want to ask about the metrics. They should be tracking that. They should know, if not off the top of their head, that's information that they should be able to obtain pretty quickly. And if they're not measuring it, that's definitely a bad sign for how well their help desk is being managed.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.